At the same time, Isin is not just dealing with Larsa in the south, it's dealing with another kingdom in the north called Ishuna, based around the city of Ishuna, controlling the Tigris in the north. And at Ishuna, again, we see similar temples being built, this one being the temple of Ishtar Kidim, where we can see, again, a straight access temple, but combining not just the straight access, but also a bent access approach from this central courtyard. Our niching again showing us that we are dealing with a temple. Here's a reconstruction. Again, an urban temple surrounded by a number of administrative buildings with access straight in from the street to the cella, which is, instead of being a long room, is now a very broad and shallow room. And also a bent access approach coming in here from this central courtyard. So combining the two. And again, this is something that we saw as early as the Neo-Sumerian period, at the end of it, with the Shu-Sin temple, with the straight access approach. And this later palace, which was built, a governor's palace, built up against the side of the Shu-Sin temple. You can see how this temple was later modified to give access to the temple. This is the deified Neo-Sumerian ruler, Shu-Sin. This later administrative complex, or this palace, was built, it's contemporary with Mari, and you can see the parallels again with our throne room and a series of courtyards that echo Mari during this time. So around 1787 or so, we see in this very complicated Isin-Larsa period the emergence of another king, another Amorite king by the name of Hammurabi. And Hammurabi takes the throne of the independent city-state of Babylon. Babylon up to this point hasn't been a particularly important city, but as we'll see, under Hammurabi it begins to flourish. Again, we're dealing with a very charismatic leader like Sargon, like Shemshi-Adad, mixing a combination of ambition with decisive military action that allows him to forge a unified empire in a very short period of time. Hammurabi, his name is Amurapi in Akkadian, which really means the kinsman is a healer. And he takes control of Babylon after the abdication of his father. He inherits a kingdom that already is starting to draw other city-states together. You can see it here. This is the Babylon that Hammurabi inherited. This confederation of city-states including Kish, Sippar, and at this time he actually may have been a vassal of Shemshi-Adad to the north. He wouldn't remain so because he essentially begins to expand his empire very, very quickly. He's contending again with Isin to the north, Isin to the south, Ishuna to the northeast, Elam to the southeast, and Shemshi-Adad and the Assyrians to the north. So, he's emerging in this very, very contentious period and is beset on all sides by obstacles and enemies. We know around 1780 during this time, Elam attacks Ishuna in the north. And really, Elam is causing a tremendous amount of trouble, right? It was Elam that ended up providing the excuse for Zimri-Lim to come back and take Mari, or the opportunity for him to take Mari again. And for the first time, Elam is establishing itself in Sumer, destroying cities and imposing its rule in the region. It actually tries to start a war between Hammurabi and Larsa to the south, but instead of sort of falling for this trick, Hammurabi ends up signing a truce with Larsa, and together they're able to push back the Elamites to the east. This doesn't last very long, right? In the wake of a treaty like this, typically one side is going to turn on the other, and that's what Hammurabi does. We have texts that say that Hammurabi was very, very upset with Larsa. They didn't send him the troops that he needed. Really, they didn't back him up in the way that that they had agreed upon. And as a result, Hammurabi uses this as an excuse to take over Larsa in the south. With the south now conquered completely, and also through the help of Zimri-Lim at Mari, he's able to establish a very large empire in the south and turn his attention to Ashuna in the north. Hammurabi takes Ashuna, again, this is all within 5 years, and then, of course, you can see the writing on the wall. You would see Hammurabi, you know, taking these allies and then turning on them, absorbing them. Zimri-Lim doesn't really see the writing on the wall, and within 2 years, he's turned on Mari and taken it and sacked it, as we talked about last time. So 1760, now this outer purple outline is what Hammurabi's kingdom is looking like. He's sacked Mari, and he decides actually to, instead of just installing a governor there, he decides to burn the entire palace to the ground. So why would you do this? Why would you decide, instead of, say, putting a king in place and ruling in the north, again, this fantastic palace that even in antiquity was, you know, known as being splendid, why would you burn something like that to the ground? What's Hammurabi thinking? Taking 2 years to bring all of the goods and resources from Mari, just, you know, kind of spectacular destruction. Why wouldn't you want to leave something like Mari in the north? Anybody? Yeah, right, exactly. This is something that, with a palace like this, and we assume, again, that we have something similar in Babylon, right, that Hammurabi would have a palace on par with Mari in the north. Yeah, you don't want to leave the infrastructure in place for, you know, a king, even if you establish them in the north, to really seize power and be, again, a threat. So he destroys the infrastructure. He destroys the sort of iconic emblem of it, the palace itself. He tears it to the ground and burns it, kind of solidifying his rule in the north. This is something we see over and over and over again in all historical periods. You don't want major centers of power standing where they can later become a problem for you. In Babylon itself, we unfortunately don't know very much about the capital city. We assume, again, that there was a palace there, like the palace at Mari, but unfortunately, the levels that date to the time of Hammurabi are under the water table, and they haven't been excavated, so they're still there. We do know quite a bit about Hammurabi's Babylon, however, through a number of objects that date to his reign. Most famously, the huge stele that bears the code of Hammurabi, not actually found at Babylon, but found at Susa. Right, this was actually carted off by the Elamites in a later period, carted off at the same time that the stele of Naram Sin was carted off, brought to Susa and found there by the French in their excavations around 1901. This stele, again, is made out of diorite, attesting to the trade taking place with Oman and in the south. And it's a very, very interesting piece for a number of reasons. It's huge. Has anybody seen this? It's in the Louvre. It's about 7 feet tall. It's just absolutely massive. You can see it here, kind of coming out of the bulk, not yet fully excavated with our excavator. He's wearing a beret, which I think is very stereotypical of the French. But you can see not only does it bear an image of Hammurabi in one of these presentation scenes with a seated deity, but it's inscribed with a series of laws that wrap not only around the front, but that wrap entirely around the entire monument itself. Over 280 different laws carved into 42 columns of text that wrap 360 degrees around this very impressive and very beautiful monument. Again, this series of laws is not our earliest set of laws, right? We spent some time talking about the law codes from the time of Shulgi and Ur-Nammu. But Hammurabi's law is one of the best preserved and most impressive examples, especially because of this monumental stele that was found. And so it's very famous for that reason. It contains a lengthy prologue and an epilogue that talks in terms of the reason that the code was written on a series of stelae. And really Hammurabi says that anyone should have access to these laws. Specifically, it says that those who can't read the law should have somebody read it to them. Not that someone could read that in the first place, but the idea again being that he's making law accessible to the people and establishing it in a prominent place where it could be viewed. The laws, like the laws that we saw during the time of Shulgi, cover a variety of different situations that might arise. They cover social, economic, and religious aspects of life, but very different than the laws that we saw during the time of Ur-Nammu, or Ur-Namma and Shulgi. These laws are based on a different set of principles. The principle before that we saw, right, if you do damage to someone, you paid a fine. In this case, we see a very different set of principles. The idea of lex talionis, which is the law of retribution. Really what it comes down to is an eye for an eye. If you damage somebody's person or damage someone's property, then you will have the same done unto you. And this is quite different. And some have thought that, again, this is linked to the fact that Hammurabi was an Amorite, and Amorites are a bit more tribal, and this is a bit more like tribal law, a desert tradition, a nomadic tradition. But again, we see the same emphasis on control that we saw during the time of Shulgi, the same emphasis on regulating economy, but also society and the organs of government themselves. About half of these laws deal with matters of contract, establishing wages that are being paid, also the terms of those contracts, so liability if something goes wrong. And they're done in this very clever sort of way. There's really an attention on again, this idea of justice being lex talionis, right? Equality, balance. So I'll give you a few examples, right? So if a builder builds a house and it collapses on the owner, then that builder is taken and a wall is collapsed onto him, right? So again, right, it's perfect symmetry. You've caused this, now you're going to suffer the same thing. If the owner's son is killed by the wall, then the son of the builder is killed in the same way. So we see again this very kind of severe balance. I'll give you a few more examples. If a robber breaks into a house by digging a hole and he's caught, then he's put to death in front of that hole and buried in it. So I mean, I don't know how this would be for the owners of the house. Now you have the corpse of the guy who tried to rob you, you know, sort of in your wall, decomposing. That's not very nice. But you see the emphasis here, right? You see the sort of it's not really irony, but you know, there's definitely an attractive quality to this kind of justice. A few more. If a house catches fire and someone loots it while it's burning, then that person shall be thrown into the fire that is burning in that house. And if a tavern keeper takes money for the price of drinks and the drinks aren't worth the value that she takes, she should be thrown into the river. So again, this very severe sets of laws that are put in place that regulate the interactions, economic interactions. We see the same breakdown that we saw during Shulgi, the classes. These laws apply differently depending on what class you come from. We have three different classes: the awilim, or free man, who would pay taxes to government, who would probably do military service. We see mishkenim, who are dependents of these individuals, women and children, for example, and then wardom, the same concept of